Okay, so you've done your trials and hopefully it went well, but what should you do now that you've got your trials back and you've got the HSC looming in a very short period of time? So the very first thing you should do is when you get your paper back, take a really thorough look at your actual response. So you will have comments that the teachers will have given you, and then there's some self-evaluation that you should do, because the teachers don't necessarily have a lot of time to give you very extensive feedback, on every single thing that you've written. So you may have gotten comments like, needs to answer the question better, needs further evaluation or analysis in these particular areas, conclusion may have been, whatever it is. So it's great to keep that feedback in mind. So if they are saying things like, you haven't answered the question properly, very common piece of feedback and a reason for why marks are taken off. Obviously for English, but that would be the case for other subjects as well, because obviously answering the question is crucial. So what you want to do is take the paper, have a highlighter, and have a look at where you've used the words of the question, or depending on which particular one. So let's start with sort of the essay question. So we've got common module essay, module A essay, module B essay. So you start with those ones, have a highlighter, go and highlight the keywords of the question, and then go and highlight in your answer where you used those words of the question in your answer. I do have another video about how to incorporate the question into your answer, and I'll just recap some of that here, but it'd be good to have a look at that. It's the difference between 13 out of 20 to 20 out of 20 as the other video. But what you want to do is have that highlighter, see where you've used the words of the question, and start kind of evaluating how well you've done that. Okay, so the first thing is, like, when you've used the words, if you've used none, then straight out that's going to be worth about a 13 out of 20. Okay, so if you've gotten a mark around there, that's a really big indication that that's probably where you lost the marks. Some of it could be to do with your argument as well, but that's going to be, if you're around that range, you probably have not addressed the question. Okay, so that's the first thing. So if you have tried to answer the question, make sure the direct words of the question are in the answer. Sometimes people think they've answered the question because they've used, synonyms, and they go, oh yeah, that's pretty much what it is. That can often happen when the question's a bit easier, because people go, oh, well, that's basically what I've prepared, so I'll just write out my prepared response. But it is so crucial to still use those exact words from the question in your answer. It may be an easy substitution. You could just be able to put a synonym in instead of a word that you have. You could put one from the question, and that could work really seamlessly, but you still have to actually physically do that, right? It's not up to the teachers to figure out whether or not you've answered it based on the fact that you've used a synonym and you think you're doing about the right thing. Okay, it's got to be like black and white clear. Think about teachers when they're marking responses. They've got heaps of papers to mark. They want to get through it as quickly as possible. They want to give you the highest mark they possibly can. They're really looking for places to give you marks. And when they see the words of the question, that's the very first place that they're going to start saying, yeah, okay, great. I can see this person's really addressed the question. That's a huge positive right off the bat, because of how many people don't actually do that, and how much of an indication it is that you've done the work, you've understood the content, and you've really made an attempt to use the content that you have fully understood and been able to start using it in alignment with the actual question they're given. So huge ticks for when they see that you use a question. Obviously, don't just parrot the question. You can't, if you look at your answer and you've just basically repeated the question in the first sentence and then just gone into your own thing for the rest of the introduction, that is not answering the question. Okay, so I like to think of it like, if you are integrating a quote, you should always try and use a quote in your sentence. So having very short quotes is really good for that, so that you can sort of have it seamlessly be integrated into your own sentence, right? Rather than just having it like as its own sentence and not, sort of flowing from a grammatical sense. Same thing when you're using the words of the question. You want to use the question in a way where it just flows seamlessly inside your own sentence. So you use the words, but make it your own sentence. You don't just repeat what the question says. So you may have found that when you get your highlighter out, you've done it, like you've actually used the words of the question in the introduction a couple of times, but maybe you forgot about half the question. So you just use words from the beginning of the question and not the second part. Or sometimes if you get given like a quotation and then you have a question after it, you didn't use the quotations. That's a whole missed opportunity of where you could have used the words of the question. So you want to start evaluating like to what level you've been using the question. People often think English is really difficult because, you know, it's not like maths where there's one answer and you can just go and look it up and you've got a formula. But really, there actually is a formula if you know what you're doing and what you're looking for. Okay, so and that's what I'm covering now. So going through the question in terms of looking for how the words have been used and to what sophistication they've been used throughout. Your introduction, definitely in your topic sentences. It's got to be in your topic sentences. Make sure that when you actually have your paragraph, what you've argued and the quotes you've used actually match up with what you've got in the topic sentence. Sometimes people write topic sentences that link to the question, but then their actual response doesn't really make sense in alignment with the topic sentence. So you've got to make sure that your argument has also been formulated to match up with what was in that topic sentence. And then that's being done throughout your paragraphs, and then your conclusion should just fully be based on the question. So like a really easy way, like therefore reiterate your answer to the question. So the conclusion should just pretty much be like a concise version of your introduction, basically, like 2 sentences is really fine. So, you know, sometimes people have also really made an effort to answer the question in the first half of the essay, but in the second half, it's kind of, oh my gosh, I just need to rush and get through this material. And then that goes out the window. So that as well is going to be like a few mark deduction. So, you know, when you've got your trials in front of you, get that highlighter, go through and highlight where you've actually used the words of the question, how well you've done it. And the more you can evaluate what you need to improve yourself, the better you're going to go for the HSC, because then you can start actually implementing that self-evaluation and then practicing it going forward. And look, no one's, I mean, when you get your papers back, they're not going to tell you exactly where and how you haven't answered the question. There may be some notes, and then you'll usually see them in the introduction on the topic sentences, like how does this address the question? And this is what you need to do to figure out or know what was missing there. Okay, so there probably wouldn't have been a word used from the question. And that's why they've said this doesn't address the question. Really, that simple, like that simple. The next thing, you know, to have a look at is with your craft of writing, have a look at, you know, in your story, how well have you thought about the stimulus? You know, with the stimulus, you've got, you know, did you actually break down and think about what the meaning was behind the actual stimulus given, right? So, you know, as an example, a previous HSC has been like a cage, and then there's been a hand coming through with a pen, you know, so then you would have a look at that and go, oh, okay, so there's this idea that this person is potentially like trapped, but they get freedom through their writing, through their like creative expression. And so if you could incorporate that into your story somehow, or your discursive or what have you, that's what they're looking for, you know, as opposed to, let's say, an actual physical person inside a cage or a, you know, a cell or whatever writing. But of course that could possibly work as well, but, you know, looking at it from the like metaphorical sense is a bit more sophisticated. Then when you're looking at your reflection statement, have you referred to the prescribed text? You shouldn't really be quoting from the prescribed text. You should say what sort of technique they've used and why. You don't need to quote, but then you do need to quote yourself, okay, from an evaluative standpoint. So like, you use this technique that so-and-so used, here's the example, and here's the effect. There should be 3 of those usually, depending on the mark distribution. Usually it's like a 12 for the main piece and an 8 for the reflection. So try to have 3 examples of stylistic features you've used in your reflection. But again, that may be slightly different based on the length of the marks allocated. But yeah, usually the 12-8 is the main one. And then you've got the comprehension. So actually read through it. You know, people get their papers back and they just don't look at them. And that's such a wasted opportunity, because it's only by evaluating what you've actually done in your trials that you'll be able to really see what there is to work on. And look, you may have a tutor that's going to be able to go through it with you, or, you know, may sit down with the teacher, but there are some ways that you can really for yourself have a look at it. Because when you're under exam conditions, it's totally different looking at something in hindsight when you're not under that time pressure to doing it in the timed response, right? So if you do that work outside of the timed response where you go, oh, here's what I didn't do. Oh yeah, okay, I see why that particular response got this particular mark. That's your best way of then being able to make those adjustments and then start practicing papers again, implementing that particular feedback. And the trials is usually the first time you've ever sat down and done that hour and a half and the 2 hours. And the 2 hour one with 3 sections is like a very big ask, right? It's a very challenging thing to do. But now you've done it. Awesome. It's great practice. It's the best preparation. Let's call it a trial. That's why they call it a trial, but it's the best preparation for your HSC to do that practice. And now you know what to expect 100% through the whole thing. Now you can actually, look at what you did, look at where you went wrong, what was missing, what could you have prepared a bit more? Did you forget things in certain places? Do you need to go back and revise your stuff a little bit more? That's what you can really evaluate. So after the trials, and this isn't just for English, this is for every paper, go and look through it. Don't just shove it in your bag or, forget about it. It's really your best way of seeing exactly what happened in the exam. Figure out where you lost the marks. If you don't know where it was, go and find someone who can help you with that. But use a couple of the things I've said to really guide you in terms of, like figuring out where you lost those marks so that you know what to focus on in the lead up to the HSC.